Have you ever really stopped to think about, well, why we believe what we believe? Especially today, right? With so much information flying around, sometimes skepticism just feels easier.
It really does.
So today we're doing a deep dive. We're looking into the foundations of belief itself. We've got this stack of sources, scientific papers, history, philosophy, exploring the case for theistic belief, especially through a Christian lens.
Yeah, and it's quite a range.
You're going to hear some compelling arguments, some pretty surprising stories about people changing their minds, non-believers becoming believers, and we'll point you towards ways to explore more if you want to. There's quite a bit here.
And just to be clear, our goal isn't to tell you what to believe. Not at all.
No.
It's more about, helping you unpack the arguments and the evidence that are in this material we've reviewed. We really just hope you'll approach it with curiosity, maybe a critical eye too. See what makes sense to you.
Okay, let's dive in then. Let's start unpacking this. And we kick off with a really fascinating thought from someone you might know, Blaise Pascal. Brilliant guy, mathematician, physicist. Has a whole theory named after him.
Oh yeah, Pascal. Very sharp mind.
Right. And the sources start us off with his perspective, which is almost strategic, he says. It is better to believe in God and be wrong than to not believe in him and be wrong.
Pascal's wager.
Exactly. It's like he's suggesting, purely from logic, almost like game theory, weighing the odds in this huge gamble of life, that faith could actually be seen as a rational choice, maybe even the safer bet.
It's interesting how that philosophical wager sort of resonates with what some major scientists have said, not maybe in the exact same way, but the underlying sentiment.
How so?
Well, let's take Albert Einstein. He wasn't, conventionally religious, but he had that famous line, science without religion is lame, religion without science is blind.
Right, I've heard that.
He felt that real scientists needed this profound faith, a faith that the universe is rational, that it's comprehensible. For him, doing science was tied up with this sense of awe, almost spiritual wonder.
That makes sense. And he wasn't alone.
Not at all. Think about Max Planck, basically the father of quantum theory. Nobel Prize winner.
Okay.
In his Nobel acceptance speech back in 1918, he said something pretty stunning. He said, there is no matter as such. All matter originates and exists only by virtue of a force. And he goes on, we must assume behind this force the existence of a conscious and intelligent mind. This mind is the matrix of all matter.
Wow, Planck said that. The quantum guy.
Yep, pointing towards some kind of underlying intelligence behind it all. And then there's Erwin Schrödinger, another physics Nobel laureate.
What did he add?
He argued that the scientific picture, while true, is very deficient. It can describe facts, order, but it can't talk about the experience of red or joy or sadness.
The qualitative stuff.
Exactly. He said, so science knows nothing of beauty and ugly, sweet or sad, God and eternity. His point was, if science intentionally excludes personality, emotion, how could it ever grasp the most sublime idea, God? These pioneers saw the limits.
It's really powerful hearing these, giants of science basically saying our tools are amazing, but they don't capture everything.
Precisely.
But the case for belief isn't just science, right? It goes way back into philosophy. I was struck by how figures like St. Thomas Aquinas, centuries ago, built these arguments just using reason. Our sources mention his 5 proofs.
Classic arguments. It's still debated today.
Yeah. Like the unmoved mover. If everything that moves was started by something else, you follow that chain back. If eventually something had to start the first motion, right? Something that wasn't itself moved.
The ultimate source of motion.
Or the first cause. Same idea, but with cause and effect. Everything's caused by something. Trace it back. There must be an original uncaused cause.
Makes logical sense.
And the necessary being, if everything we see could have not existed, it's contingent, then there must be something that has to exist whose existence isn't dependent on anything else.
Something non-contingent.
Right. And the absolute being, when we say something's better or more true, aren't we comparing it to some ultimate standard, some perfect goodness or truth?
The idea of degrees of perfection.
And finally, the grand designer. Just looking at the sheer order, the purposefulness in the universe, how things seem designed, it kind of implies an intelligent designer, doesn't it?
That argument from design is very compelling for many people. And then you have someone like C.S. Lewis coming at it from a more personal philosophical angle.
Lewis.
His crooked line analogy, he said, basically, my big argument against God used to be that the universe is so cruel and unjust.
Okay.
But then I thought, he said, how did I even get this idea of just and unjust? You don't call a line crooked unless you have some idea of what a straight line is.
So having a concept of injustice implies you must have some innate sense of justice.
Exactly. It suggests we have this built-in moral compass, a sense of right and wrong that seems to point beyond just random material processes.
But that brings up the really tough question, doesn't it? If there's this standard or this designer, what about all the suffering? The problem of evil?
The huge question.
Yeah.
And the sources cackle it head on. They mention God's response to Job in the Bible, essentially, I am God, you are not. It points to the limits of our understanding.
We can't expect to grasp the full picture.
Right. And Lewis himself wrestled with this deeply. He wrote The Problem of Pain, and later, after his wife died, The Very Raw, A Grief Observed. But the key takeaway isn't that belief makes suffering vanish. It's about how believers respond within it.
Can you give an example from the sources?
Sure. Betsy, 10 Boom in the Ravensbrück concentration camp, dying. She tells her sister Corey, we must tell them. There's no pit so deep that he is not deeper still, because they'd been in that pit.
Wow.
Or there's Nick, born without limbs, who insists he's ridiculously happy because he feels God uses his situation to inspire others.
Incredible perspective.
And maybe the most powerful, Elie Wiesel's account in Night. Seeing a child hanged in Auschwitz, someone cries out, where is God? And Wiesel hears a voice within him answer, where he is. This is where hanging here from this gallows.
That's incredibly bleak, but also profound.
It connects to that core Christian idea of God suffering with humanity. Faith doesn't deny the pain. It finds meaning, or at least presence, within the pain.
Okay, so moving beyond the sort of intellectual and the deeply personal, what about the practical historical impact?
Oh, it's massive. The sources argue Christianity fundamentally shaped Western morality, society, the things we often just assume are normal.
Like what?
Well, education, for one. The Reformation really pushed literacy because people needed to read the Bible themselves. That drove primary education. And all the early Ivy League schools in the U.S., Harvard, Yale, founded with explicitly religious missions.
I didn't realize it was that direct.
And it wasn't just in the West. Look at Africa. A century ago, very few of its hundreds of languages had a written form. The source's state missionaries are responsible for creating written forms for about 500 of them.
500 languages. Wow, the educational impact alone is huge.
Huge. Then there's human rights. William Wilberforce's fight against slavery in Britain, driven entirely by his Christian faith. David Livingstone, the missionary explorer, exposed the horrors of the Arab slave trade. These weren't side issues, they were applications of their faith.
And acts of mercy.
Absolutely. Mother Teresa, obviously. George Mueller, starting orphanages for thousands. John Howard, reforming prisons. The Salvation Army. Christian hospitals worldwide. The sources claim half of all medical aid in Africa comes via faith-based groups. It's presented as a legacy of real, positive transformation.
That's a very different picture than you sometimes hear. People often link religion with conflict.
Right, and that's a crucial point the sources address. They cite the Encyclopedia of War, which looked at over 1,700 recorded wars. Guess how many were primarily religious?
I don't know. A lot.
Only 7%. And if you exclude wars involving Islam, it drops to just over 3%.
Only 3%. That's surprisingly low.
It really reframes the narrative, doesn't it? Now, compare that to the death tolls under explicitly atheistic regimes in the 20th century.
Okay.
The sources list figures: Mao in China, potentially up to 60 million dead. The Soviet Union under Lenin, Stalin, Khrushchev, maybe 66 million. The Khmer Rouge in Cambodia killed over a third of their own population.
Those numbers are staggering.
The argument made is stark. The greatest evil has always resulted from denial of God, not pursuit of him. And importantly, it adds that violence done claiming to be Christian, but contradicting Christ's teachings like love your enemies, can't fairly be blamed on Christianity. The fault lies with those disobeying the teachings.
That's a critical distinction. What about science in the Bible? That's often seen as a conflict zone.
Yeah, but the sources suggest it's more nuanced. Take Galileo, often painted as anti-church. But he apparently said, Scripture is a book about going to heaven. It's not a book about how the heavens go. He saw different purposes.
Theology versus astronomy.
Exactly. And interestingly, the Bible seems to contain knowledge ahead of its time. Isaiah, writing centuries before Christ, mentions the circle of the earth, hinting at sphericity long before it was common knowledge. Jeremiah talks about the stars being innumerable, which wasn't really grasped until telescopes came along much later.
Oh, interesting tidbits. Anything more substantial?
Well, during the Black Plague, church leaders apparently used quarantine instructions from the Old Testament book of Leviticus about isolating the sick, which helped slow the spread. practical application of ancient text.
That's practical.
And the Big Bang Theory, people often think it contradicts Genesis, but its originator was Georges Lemaitre, a Catholic priest.
No kidding. A priest came up with the Big Bang.
Yep. And archaeology keeps turning up things that align with biblical history. Tablets mentioning figures or places once thought mythical, like King Belshazzar, or providing context for Moses' time. It adds layers of historical corroboration.
Okay, archaeology history. What about something more out there, like consciousness?
Now that gets really fascinating. The sources delve into consciousness potentially existing beyond the physical brain. Near-death experiences, NDEs, are a big part of this.
I've heard about those, the tunnels of light.
Sometimes, but it's more consistent than that. Common themes are heightened senses, wordless communication, life reviews, even reported by people born blind who describe seeing during their NDE.
People born blind describing sight. How is that possible?
That's the profound question, isn't it? Researchers like Dr. Maurice Rawlings and John Burke have documented scores of these. They strongly suggest consciousness isn't just brain activity, especially when the brain is clinically non-functional.
Is there a specific case that stands out?
The Pam Reynolds case is often cited. She was clinically dead flat EEG, no brainstem response for about 20 minutes during a complex brain surgery.
Completely gone, medically speaking.
Right. Yet when revived, she accurately recalled specific details of conversations and procedures that happened during that time, things she couldn't possibly have known through normal senses.
So her consciousness was operating without her brain.
That's the mind-bending implication. And it's echoed by people like Dr. Allan J. Hamilton, a Harvard neurosurgeon. His own experiences, documented in The Scalpel and the Soul, led him to believe humans are fundamentally spiritual beings rather than biological ones.
A brain surgeon saying that carries weight.
It does, and you even see hints of this recognized outside religious contexts. Singapore's former PM, Lee Kuan Yew, an agnostic, observed his devout Christian friend, Ng Kok Song.
Okay.
Ng Kok Song showed this incredible serenity after his wife died. Lee Kuan Yew, who practiced meditation, admitted he couldn't reach that same level of peace. He saw something in his friend's faith that went beyond technique.
A different kind of resilience.
Yeah. And even the comedian Louis Black, an atheist, talked about feeling his deceased brother's spirit helping him, comforting him after his death. Rational people encountering something they can't easily explain materially.
Which leads us perfectly into these stories of transformation. Because it's one thing to talk concepts, another to see people's lives change.
Exactly. And this is where it gets really compelling. We're talking about people, often highly intelligent, starting out as skeptics or non-believers,
Right.
who then dig into the facts, the evidence, the experiences, and end up concluding that belief is actually the most rational position.
Who are some examples from the sources?
Well, one amazing story is Sir Lionel Luckhoo, Guinness Book of Records holder for being the world's most successful lawyer. 245 murder acquittals in a row.
That's unbelievable. A lawyer's lawyer.
Totally. This is a man who lived and breathed evidence. He decided to apply his legal mind to the evidence for the resurrection of Jesus Christ.
Okay, what did he find?
After what he called an exhaustive analysis, he concluded, and I quote, "The evidence is so overwhelming that it compels acceptance by proof, which leaves absolutely no room for doubt."
From the world's most successful lawyer. That's quite an endorsement.
Isn't it? Then there's Josephine Bakita, a Sudanese woman sold into slavery as a child. She spoke of feeling God in her heart even then, before she formally encountered Christianity through nuns who eventually helped free her. It speaks to that innate sense, maybe.
A different kind of journey from the heart.
Yes. And we already mentioned C.S. Lewis, the Oxford Don, the atheist intellectual who reasoned his way to faith, partly via that crooked line idea.
A classic example.
And Dr. Allan Hamilton, the neurosurgeon we talked about. His direct experiences in the operating theater fundamentally changed his view of human nature from purely biological to primarily spiritual.
So a lawyer, a former slave, an academic, a surgeon, diverse paths leading to belief based on examining truth.
Exactly. The sources make the point that for many it wasn't blind faith, but the discovery of truth that led them to convert.
So after covering all this ground, philosophy, science, history, personal experience, transformations, what does this mean for you listening right now?
Well, if any of this has sparked your curiosity, if you're intrigued, the good news is the sources we drew from offer a ton of pathways to dig deeper yourself. It's really a treasure trove if you want to explore further.
Okay, great. So where should people start? Can you list some of those resources?
Absolutely. We've really just skimmed the surface. But if you want to dive in, For the problem of suffering, C.S. Lewis is key to the problation. The problem of pain, and maybe the more personal, a grief observed.
Okay, Lewis on suffering.
For evidence, especially historical and legal angles, check out Cold Case Christianity by J. Warner Wallace. He's a homicide detective applying his skills to the Gospels. People often mention it alongside Lee Strobel's Case for Christ.
Got it. Detective work on the Gospels.
For the huge historical impact of Christianity on Western thought, Tom Holland's Dominion is a major work.
Holland's Dominion. Okay.
If you're wrestling with science and faith, Professor John Lennox has accessible stuff like his work answering, "Can Science Explain Everything?"
Lennox on science.
For near-death experiences, there's the documentary To Hell and Back with Dr. Maurice Rawlings and John Burke's book Imagine Heaven.
NDE resources. Good.
Again, for that medical perspective on consciousness, besides Dr. Hamilton's The Scalpel and the Soul, there's also Paul Pearsall's The Heart's Code.
Hamilton and Pearsall.
You can also find Sir Lionel Luckhoo's legal analysis online. Look for risefromthedead.pdf. There's a specific medical journal article on Jesus' death in JAMA. And for science stuff like the Cambrian Explosions Challenge to Darwinism, there are YouTube resources easily searchable.
Perfect. We'll make sure all those links and titles are in our show notes for you.
Great. It's a lot to chew on.
It really is. This deep dive has taken us through, well, quite a landscape. Intellectual arguments, deep personal experiences, the sweep of history, and these really compelling stories of people changing their fundamental beliefs.
Yeah, it really makes you think. And it brings us back to something Peter Lawrence observed, which feels like a fitting place to pause.
What's that?
He said, "Those who earnestly search for truth eventually came to believe. For some, no proof will suffice."
Those who earnestly searched for truth eventually came to believe. For some, no proof will suffice. That really says a lot about the nature of belief and evidence, doesn't it?
It suggests it's a journey, perhaps less about irrefutable proof and more about an honest search.
Well, thank you for joining us on the deep dive today. We genuinely hope this exploration has given you some valuable things to consider, whatever your starting point.
Keep asking questions.
Keep seeking, keep questioning, and keep diving deep into your own quest for understanding.